We are now well over halfway into Regulation F, and as the metagame has continued to develop, we've had some really unique teams come out and have really strong results. And because of that, I've gone ahead and picked 20 cores that in my opinion are the best in the format, and because of this, the lowest tier we have here is the B tier, and if I'm being honest, I'm not even sure if we're going to use it. I'll also do my best to discuss which Pokemon work well with each of the cores listed below. And finally guys, if you think I missed any cores that I should have mentioned, let me know down in the comment section below, and while you're down there, consider liking and subscribing, as it helps the channel a lot, and your boy's just trying to provide the best VGC content possible. So to kick us off here, the first core we're going to be looking at is the 222 Dozo core. Now, 222 Dozo is pretty simple if I'm being honest. Normally, it really just comes down to these two mons here, as in Dozo Tatsugiri, paired up with normally Qianpao Dragonite and Fluttermane and Chiyu. And occasionally as well, you will see different things thrown in there, things like potentially Glamora and an Ogerpon form as well, is very, very common. But really the idea behind this team is you have these different leads that are very, very hard to lead into because there's not necessarily one lead that's good into all three. And because of that, you're really able to kind of just, essentially break a hole through for the Dondozo, or at least if it's a bad Dondozo matchup, you have two very powerful offensive cores that can kind of just also run through the enemy team, pick up very quick KOs and then clean up, right? Things like obviously the Fluttermane and the Chiyu can open really well for the Qianpao and the D-Knight. They can break through something that potentially would wall out the, for example, the Terra normal E-speeds. And of course as well, very similar thing here for Dondozo where they kind of come in, they get a KO, and then they kind of just open up the board state for the, the Dondozo to come through and finish up the game. Now, I do think this is a very strong core, especially if you are a best of one ladder player, because it is very, very difficult to deal with. But I do think this team does kind of fall off just a little bit in best of three with open team sheet. And because of that, we're going to start off here in the B+ tier. I do think it is a very, very strong core. I definitely think it will always see good results, but I do think it is maybe a little worse than a majority of the top cores running around right now. And speaking of one of the top cores running around right now, we have the Fire Water Grass Balance core. This core commonly can be sometimes seen without the Ogerpon here. It could also have the Amoonguss switched out as well for something like the Rillaboom. Essentially, these are just the Incineroar balance cores. And if I'm being honest, this core, in my opinion, is probably the best, or at least the most consistent in the game. And because of that, I'm going to put it here in the S+ tier. Now, this core can essentially be paired with anything, right? It's very good with things that want to set up, of course, things like potentially, Calm Mind, Raging Bolt. We've even seen it played alongside things like, of course, the setup Komoos. We've also seen it, popping up a little bit recently with things like Calm Mind on the Sylveon, and of course Quiver Dance on the Volcarona. It's also very, very good paired with a very offensive combo. I've, personally played it myself alongside things like Qianpao and Urshifu. It's just a very, very strong core. It has a lot of options. It has, very, very good on lead. It can lead into a lot of different things. And honestly, it just gives you a matchup that isn't an auto loss, right? Especially when you run things like this, right? Where you have, double redirection, you have fake out, you have intimidate, potentially double fake out if you run it with things like Rillaboom. It just means like you can really just position your offensive pieces really, really well. And of course, things like Incineroar and Ogerpon, while they are, considered to be defensive pieces, they both also put on a lot of offensive pressure, right? Incineroar has Flare Blitz, which is incredibly strong, and Knock Off, which is also a very, very strong stab move that also offers a lot of utility. And of course, Ogerpon just clicking things like Ivy Cudgel is just pretty damn good. And even now, a lot of people are opting to go for things like Woodhammer to, one-shot opposing Urshifus and stuff like that. Because of that, I do think the Fire Water Grass balance is arguably the best core in the game. Now, Blood and Moon, Ursaluna, Trick Room. This was a core that was very, very dominant early in the metagame. And while it did kind of drop off a little bit, it has definitely stayed strong throughout. And actually, I believe just won the last regional championships, at least at the time of recording this. And because of that, I'm going to put it here in the A+ tier. This is obviously a core that is built around Ursaluna, Incineroar, and Giraffe. For anyone who doesn't understand how this works, essentially, if you can, save your Terra for your Blood Moon Ursaluna, Terra Normal Hyper Voice with a Life Orb next to a Helping Hand Giraffe is going to absolutely rip through a majority of teams. And then also when you pair it up with something like Incineroar gives your Giraffe essentially a free fake out, a free Trick Room, because it has fake out and you can't be faked out yourself. But also, if you've got the balls for it, you can always go for the Trick Room plus the Parting Shot out. And a lot of the time, if you can pull off something like that, where you just go Trick Room turn 1, you go Parting Shot turn 1, both your mons just, live their hits, use defensive terrors. Then next thing you know, you just Parting Shot into your Blood Moon Ursaluna. It gets him for free on the first turn of Trick Room and can really just start running through teams. Now, this is a core that can sometimes struggle with the likes of Amoonguss. Because of that, I do think an Ogerpon form is normally pretty good paired with it. Both Ogerpon Wellspring and the Rock Mask as well are actually both pretty good. But I also do think Ogerpon Fire still has merit on teams like this as well, as it does give you a bit of an offensive and a defensive piece. Not to mention there are other Pokemon as well that fit pretty well into this team. Things like Iron Hands, which is another fake out plus Pivoting Mon that also does really, really well under Trick Room. Of course, really just any Trick Room abuser is really good. It obviously pairs really well with things like Psy Spam. Also really good with Sunroom as well. So definitely a very, very strong core. And if you ever get the Trick Room up, Blood Moon Ursaluna can just wreak havoc on teams. It's very, very strong. Charlotte Rain, aka Bridge Rain. This is another really, really strong core in my opinion. I do think that the bridge here, the Archetypes is incredibly good into a lot of what's good in the metagame right now. Obviously, Dragon types are one of the best answers we currently have into the Fire, Water, Grass balance. And of course, an Assault Vest mon that has the Steel type being as a Dragon type. It's very good into, other Fairy types like Fluttermane. It's also very good into opposing Dragon types like Raging Bolt. Also, not to mention, if you ever just let it kind of set up, it can kind of just run through teams right with Rain and just, start electro-shotting everything. You start getting up your stamina boost. And next thing you know, this mon is just unkillable. It's one-shotting everything in the game. And it's really, really strong. This, the Archetypes can also be run really well as well, I think, with Tornadus in the Pelipper slot here, of course. It gives you Tailwind, it gives you Rain Dance. It's a bit better of an offensive mon. I do think Pelipper obviously giving you the instant offense, obviously, is still very, very good. But of course, this mon also pairs incredibly well with other common rain mons, right? Obviously, the Urshifu Rapid Strike comes to mind with a Choice Scarf. Obviously, things like Landorus as well is very, very good. The Landorus Incarnate form, that is. I also do think this core as well pairs incredibly well with the Fire, Water, Grass balance. I think Incineroar and Amoonguss are both very, very good with it. Even, going to Ogerpon Wellspring as well is very good in rain. It gives you obviously a redirection mon. And in general, it's just really, really good. I do think this is a very, very strong core. But unfortunately, I do think it is a little too slow pace. It doesn't necessarily have, the greatest matchup into the hyper offensive, Tailwind teams. And also can be, a bit susceptible to losing to some of the Blood Moon Trick Room teams or just Trick Room in general. But regardless, it definitely still has a lot of outs. We have seen things like Snarl pick up as well in usage on it, which obviously helps out a lot with the opposing Trick Room matchups. And we do see a lot of sets that are like 36 modest with nearly max special defense, just to make sure it can just eat any hit, especially against some of these more hyper offensive teams. Now, I have got to name this one here the Dragon Steel HO, but really this is just the Golden Go plus Regidrago with Tailwind offense. This is another really, really good core. I'm actually probably going to go ahead and put it in the S tier. I do think this is one of the best ways right now to run hyper offense. Obviously, Regidrago is probably the best dragon type in the game right now in terms of just outputting a ridiculous amount of damage. Makes it really, really good into things like Raging Bolt, which I do think is one of the best Pokemon in the metagame. And of course, one thing that Regidrago was very, very good at is baiting out Terra Fairy on a lot of Pokemon. And who loves seeing Terra Fairy? It is the man, Golden Joe. Now, this is just, again, a very, very offensive core, right? This is a core that, you normally see it paired up with things like potentially, Rillaboom and Ogerpon. Fire in particular, I do think is very good. It's also obviously very, very good with things like the Urshifus, right? Because again, Urshifu is the kind of Pokemon that, you kind of want to leave it on the back to come through and clean up games. And mons like Golden Go and Regidrago are very, very good at forcing out Terras on some Pokemon. So if there is a Pokemon that, maybe beats, maybe say it beats your Urshifu, something like, say a Fluttermane, for example, right? You can use the Golden Go to potentially either one, just rip a hole in it, or two, maybe like force it to use it like a defensive Terra. Maybe Fluttermane's not the best example because they normally just run Terra Fairy anyway. But obviously, yeah, it's a very, very good core in terms of just one, breaking open the game with a lot of spread damage, but also two, forcing out Terras early, which just really allows for the backup mons to kind of just clean house, right? And again, that's things like the, the Fire Ogerpon, the things like the Urshifu, right? That are just very, very strong. Now, the next one we have here is the Flutterfish core. And honestly, this team here, it actually, I think this core gets its own tier. We're going to call this one, this is the, oh, what have we done here? This is the Scooteezy tier. This is, for anyone who hasn't seen, this is my core. This is it. I brought Flutterfish to every tournament I've played in. I absolutely love it. It is a little bit of gambling. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes you miss a heat wave. Sometimes, you miss an overheater style. And it really, really sucks. But this is, without a doubt, in my opinion, the most fun core to play. There is nothing better than just going for like an overheat plus like a Terra Fairy Moonblast, right? It rips holes through teams there. It's a very, very good offensive team. It pairs incredibly well with obviously things like Tornadus, of course, Glamora as well, paired up with Chiyu is very, very good. It really helps that Chiyu's match up into a lot of these Trick Room teams because you have, this Specs Overheat and you have this, Power Herb Meteor Beam, basically just giving you two mons that are essentially +1 special attack on turn 1 and can kind of just rip holes through a lot of these, slower balanced teams, which I personally love. Of course, very, very good with the Urshifu as well. If you guys haven't seen, again, I've used these two a lot, right? You can go check the channel. I've done team reports on it. I've done a lot of like, paste. I've shown like my team. I used the Melbourne Regional a couple weeks ago. I also then have, done my revised version of the team that, the changes I would have made after the event. Absolutely love it. Flutterfish is, without a doubt, in my opinion, the pinnacle of hyper offense. It is definitely not as good as the Fire Water Grass balance core here. I would honestly probably put it in the S tier, but it gets a special spot here at the top in the old Scooteezy tier. So the next one here is the Firewater Grass Hyper Offensive core here. Now, very, very similar, obviously, to the core above it here. This is obviously Firewater Grass. You know, I think a fantastic combo. If you guys like haven't really seen or don't understand why people run Firewater Grass, really the only answer into a lot of these Firewater Grass teams is Dragon types, and that is why things like Raging Bolt are so good right now, because these Firewater Grass cores are super good. But, you know, when compared to obviously the Firewater Grass balance, this team does have a lot more worse matchups in the sense that it doesn't carry the bulk and it is a lot more offensive minded. But in saying that, I'm a huge, huge fan of this core right now. I think Ogerpon Fire and Rillaboom are just incredibly good into a lot of the top Pokemon right now. Things like, you know, Double Grassy Glide, of course, into things like Fluttermane is very, very good. Having a faster Fake Out into Rillaboom also is very, very nice. Of course, Urshifu is a fantastic Pokemon when, you know, looking down at a Incineroar, because Terra Water Surging Strikes will just run straight through it. And of course, Ogerpon Wellspring is, you know, one of the best answers into that. And of course, you have two very hard-hitting grass types here. And not to mention Amoonguss, again, another Pokemon that is, you know, it likes to put things to sleep. Ogerpon Fire can redirect that. And it also really likes to go for things like Terra Water. And of course, you know, you've got, you know, these two big, powerful Wood Hammers in grassy terrain. This is a core that pairs incredibly well with things like Qian Pao teams. I absolutely love this core here with Qian Pao and then a bit of support. I think it's very, very good. And in all honesty, it is just one of the best, you know, what it is probably, in my opinion at least, it is the best core or generalized core for a hyper offensive team, because it pairs incredibly well with a lot of really good hyper offensive stuff, right? And there are a couple teams we'll definitely look at shortly. I can actually just see two right now that instantly come to mind that work incredibly well with these guys. But yeah, just a Firewater Grass, you know, offensive core. It does a lot of damage. It's also really, really good into a lot of what's good in the metagame right now. Its biggest issue, at least in my opinion, obviously, is that Raging Bolt. It really does struggle to kind of deal damage to it outside of close combat. And because of that, you do need your own answers, which is a big reason why, as well, I think this core pairs incredibly well with things like Landorus Incarnate and Raging Bolt. And I believe we actually did see a very, very similar core just get second at the Utrecht Special. I believe it was Urshi Dark instead of Urshi Rapid, but it did get paired up with Landorus and Raging Bolt. Now, for the Howl HO, this is a core that has been very, very good for a lot of the current regulation. Essentially, for anyone who doesn't understand what it is or how it works, you have Gouging Fire with max speed plus speed booster next to a lot of physical attackers. Things like the King Gambit, the Qian Pao, the Dragonite, the Urshifu Rapid Strike, you know, just a lot of these mons that just love +1 physical attack. Another big one, of course, as well, is actually Ogerpon Wellspring, which is a very, very good support on these teams. But the big reason why I kind of, I guess, put these three here in particular on the photo, I guess, is because one of the best ways to deal with things like a Howl spam team is your own Intimidate spam team, right? Have your, you know, your Incineroar just sit there, Intimidate, Parting Shot, constantly cycling, constantly faking out, just being super annoying. And how do you kind of stop that? It is the guy King Gambit. He's a guy who says, hey, like, I'll take a Howl, I'll take an Intimidate, I'll get the +2, and I'll start running through. Now, I do think King Gambits right now do kind of need to run low kick. But I do, personally at least, I really like the Assault Vest set, simply because I think you want double Dark plus Steel plus Fighting coverage. Just because a lot of the Incineroars right now are running around with Terra Ghost, and because of that, I do think you want to at least be able to hit them with something like a Kowtow Cleave, just to deal massive damage when they're kind of trying to pivot around and be super duper annoying. But of course, this team, it's really good in terms of, like, you just have like 5 strong physical attackers. You give it 1 strong special attacker, whether that be like a Fluttermane, you know, a Raging Bolt, a Landorus Incarnate, whatever it is you want, right? Even like, I think I've even seen people run Golden Go on it. And then you just have these guys, like you have things like a Choice Scarf Choice Scarf Urshifu, but you have it be adamant so that it's still slower than the Gadget Fire, so the Gadget Fire can give it +1, and then you just start like running through teams with obviously the Surging Strikes. Of course, Qian Pao, like, if you don't have Intimidate, or your opponent doesn't have Intimidate, I should say, and you get Qian Pao to +1, this mon becomes a massive threat because it just starts one-shotting everything, and you have a Focus Sash, and you've got Protect, so it's just super annoying to deal with, right? I think this is just incredibly good core. The guy Will Tank has done very, very good with his Gouging Fire teams in the past, and I personally just love Gouging Fire. I think this mon's really good. I think it was super slept on at the start of the format when everyone was saying Entei was better, and I am really glad to see it doing really well. I do think it is, without a doubt, one of the best cores in the game. Next up here, we have the Komodo plus Ting Lu teams here. These are the teams that, honestly, they tend to pair up a lot with things like, they like to play with like Amoonguss, Porygon 2, Incineroar. They do, I guess, kind of just really like the Firewater Grass balance stuff as well. Now, I do think this core is very, very good, but I personally think it is very, very slow, and it's not that hard to punish as long as you have the right pieces. This is a team where if you don't have something like, say, for example, like a Fluttermane plus Landorus Incarnate, or at least a Raging Bolt plus a Landorus Incarnate, you know, you can kind of like cause a lot of issues, right? Because if you can't force the Komodo to Terra, but then also punishes it when it Terras, you're not going to have a great time. But of course, as well, it's just a super annoying team to deal with, right? It tends to like setting up Trick Room with things like P2. It's super annoying, of course, with like the Amoonguss plus the Incineroar just fake out, spoiling everything. Tinglu obviously is very, very good at helping it live hits from special attackers. In all honesty, it is just a very, very strong team. Super annoying to play with, but in my opinion, one of the main issues with it is this team, it generally just runs to like the 20-minute timer, and I do think a lot of people, where as long as they are prepared for it, they can definitely, like hold it off and beat it and, wear down the other Komodo, or at least take out the support pieces. And it's the kind of team where if you lose pieces early, it becomes very hard to pilot, especially too if you can't just like pick up KOs really quickly with things like body press, right? Like if your opponent is running something like a Golden Go, you really need to focus down the Golden Go. But the issue is if you can't get the Golden Go out of there quick enough, all of a sudden, you lose a piece or two, and then the Golden Go just kind of walls you out, right? And then you kind of just run through it. Especially too when Golden Go is paired up with things like, the potentially like things like Ogre Fire or, Urshifu Rapid Strike that can kind of just break holes in things like Amoonguss and Incineroar. Now, Roaring Moon Balance, aka Moon with just Fire, Water, Grass. This is a very, very strong core. I honestly don't know where I want to put this. I'm a huge fan of Roaring Moon, and because of that, I think I am a little bit biased, but really it is just the best core in the game, paired up with Roaring Moon. I'm going to put it in the A+ tier. Simply because I think Roaring Moon is definitely a very, very good Dragon type right now, and I think Double Redirection plus Dragon Dance is very good. Obviously, we saw Neil have really, really good results with it. I think he got top 8 at Charlotte off memory, and then of course Kieran went on to win the Melbourne Regional using the exact same team. And because of that, I do think the team here is very, very good. Very, very strong, but I do think the biggest issue really with the team is Roaring Moon is probably not the best Dragon type in the format, but in saying that, it is definitely, a top 3 to top 5 Dragon type, with all of them still being very, very good. Obviously, I do think Raging Bolt is probably the king of the dragons right now, but there are a lot of just really, really good dragons in general, right? Obviously, Regidrago is very good. I think Baxcalibur is a little bit slept on right now, if I'm being honest. D-Knight's definitely a very, very strong option still. There are a lot of really good dragon types, and I do think dragon types on these balance teams are very good, just to help counteract the other dragons. And of course, I do believe it is actually the fastest dragon type in the format. So because of that, especially having things like Breaking Swipe to be super annoying into, some of these opposing guys, I do think is obviously very, very nice. And yeah, it's just a mon that it can set up, it can deal a lot of damage with Acrobatics, which I think is a big plus for it. Again, you look at a lot of these top teams here, and I do think Acrobatics kind of just runs rampant, right? You look at this, this team here at this Fire, Water, Grass Hyper Offense, not one of them wants to eat a flying move. You look at this team here, again, none of them really want to eat a flying move outside of like Incin. But really, a lot of these moons go for attack booster, and because of that, you can still deal massive damage to the Incineroar, even if the Incin gets the Intimidate off, because you still get the attack boost. But yeah, very, very good. Obviously, a Dark type as well is very, very good into a lot of these Trick Room teams. It has a lot of natural special defense as well, which is, again, very good into a lot of these Trick Room teams. And yeah, I think it's just very, very good. I think it's like a very, very solid core. Next up, we have the new Snow. This is the core that just went ahead and won the Utrecht Special. I'm going to put this one in the S tier, I think. So, essentially, for anyone who doesn't know what this core is, this is essentially the Snow team that just won, right? It is a team that I think is very, very good into the current metagame, because when you have offensive ice types, right? Again, they're really, really good. You look at these teams here, right? No one on this team outside of like the Incin here wants to eat a ice type move. Again, this team here, Golden Go can eat it. But like, what are these? But like, both these mons have in common? They don't really want to face down a Banded Arcanine, right? Arcanine's Rock Slides do way too much damage to the Incineroar, and of course, the Flare Blitz is just going to one-shot a Golden Go. And again, you start looking down, some of these teams here. You look at things like this one here, right? Intimidate doesn't really matter on, things like the Articuno. Of course, Trick Room teams generally struggle into screens teams because it kind of slows down the tempo a lot. Like, a lot of these Trick Room teams, they really want to pick up like 2 to 3 KOs in the Trick Room. And then if Trick Room does end, they're normally at like a 3-1 mon advantage, where when you have things like Alola Ninetales, you kind of just set up the Snow, set up the Veil, and then they kind of can't break through, especially when, you've got things like Light Clay. And then, of course, as well, like, Incineroar, yeah, it can be annoying, right? It can go for knockoff, can parting shot out. But again, right, you don't really ever want to fake out turn 1 because it's just going to be Blizzard plus Veil. Even if you stop the Veil from going up, now what are you doing, right? You're going for a Flare Blitz in the Snow where these mods have got a lot of, physical defense. Again, you get up the Veil. It's very good at stalling out a lot of these Trick Rooms. It's fantastic as well, I think, in the Weather Wars right now. I actually got to see one of the homies today in the NPAA beat Sun with Snow, which to me was wild. It was a very, very well-played set. But yeah, I think this Snow team is just like really, really good. They all cover each other really well. Obviously, again, screens is very good. Having fairy coverage, I think, is very good. Alola Ninetales speed is also like really, really interesting. It is 1 point slower than the Ogre but a lot of the time, if the Ogre aren't max speed, which really, I think only Fire Ogre right now is running max speed, it can deal a lot of damage there. The Blizzards are super annoying. The Moonblast obviously really good into both the Urshifu forms. The Articuno is choice specs on these teams, which is like super scary because this is a really, really bulky mon. And specs blizzards in the snow is just, again, it's scary. But on top of that as well, this mon just has a 25% chance to dodge your attacks. So yeah, that's always fun. And then of course, finally, Hisuian Arcanine. I think it just pairs really, really well with this team. I think it's like a great defensive piece, right? Another really good defensive piece as well, obviously, is something like the Ogerborn Wellspring. I think pairs really, really well with it as well. But yeah, this is just, it's super cool. I think Ice right now, the Ice type in general is really, really good offensively. And yeah, I think the defensive work that this team can also put out while also being very offensive is definitely very, very good. Now, the famous Power Knight core. I'm going to smack this probably just in the A tier. I'm a huge fan of Power Knight, but the biggest issue I think Power Knight has a lot of the time is it's very, very good early in the metagame, right? We saw very similar to the Blood Moon Trick Room stuff. It dominated early Regulation F, but eventually it does kind of fall off, and that's because a lot of people kind of just start figuring out answers into it, right? For example, me at the Melbourne Regional, about a month ago or something like that, I ran a Ogerborn Wellspring with enough bulk to never die to a choice banded Terra Normal E-Speed next to a Qian Power, and because of that, I was essentially just able to put myself in a very, very strong position from turn 1, where I say, hey, you have to double to kill this, and then all of a sudden I'm going to hit you with some massive spread damage, right? Whether that be something like a Heat Wave out of a Specs Chi-Yu, a Dazzling Gleam coming off of a Flutter Mane, right? It's just, it was very, very good, and a lot of these teams here do have answers into that. Of course, obviously, things like Psy Spam and the Giraffe are still pretty popular. Of course, there are a lot of, these bulkier teams where Incineroars now, they're all running Terra Ghost. Some of them are even opting for things like Will-O-Wisp as well, which just hard walls these two, right? Because you can't Sacred Sword it, you can't Sucker Punch it. Do you really want to risk the Ice Crash on turn 1? And then all of a sudden, maybe they just go Terra Ghost, burn your Qian Power, burn your Dragonite, and the game's just essentially over because you have these two really very, very strong offensive pieces that can't do any damage. But in saying that, this is a core where in the right game, they just kind of run through everything. I think it is very, very good still. But of course, again, in a metagame where there is so much diversity right now, it is very matchup picky, right? For example, I'm a Flutterfish player. I love Flutterfish. I don't think Flutterfish is that good into Qian Power D-Knight. And because of that, I had to work out all these different lines just to be able to make the matchup manageable. And even then, I'm pretty sure I still went 1-1 against it on day 2 at Melbourne, which is, it's not the greatest, right? And of course, when you got things like, these Amoonguss Incineroar teams running around where it's Amoonguss is going to be Rocky Helmet. It's going to be, sporing. It's okay, you've got to double it to kill it, but it could just spore you turn 1. And if it spores you and it breaks your helmet, then it's it's not a fun time, right? So still definitely a very, very good core. Obviously, loves to play with things like, of course, the Urshifu Rapid Strike. Also pairs incredibly well with these Howl teams, but I do think D-Knight on these Howl teams isn't the greatest, and because of that, I'm going to put Power Knight a little bit lower than these Howl teams. So we have the old Psy Spam. I'm actually not a believer in Psy Spam. I know it's had a lot of good results still. Even to this day, I'm pretty sure it just won an event, I think, or at least a big online tour. I forget exactly what it was. But these teams here, it's pretty simple, right? You've got the Indeedee and you've got the Hatterene, right? They want to get up Trick Room and they just want to click Expanding Force with Helping Hand or Follow Me. You've got the Glade, which I do think is a crucial piece on these teams. 1, obviously it has Wide Guard. 2, it's just another Trick Room mon. But then also on top of that, it just deals a lot of physical damage, right? Sharpness Psycho Cutter in Psychic Terrain deals a lot of damage. And not to mention, it's just really good into a lot of the stuff that beats things like Psy Spam, right? Obviously, something like Flutterfish, right? Or, Chi-Yu or Dark types in general. A Stab Sacred Sword off this mon is kind of nutty, especially when you go for something like Clear Amulet and then you have Sharpness. You just have this, what is it? I think a base 130 stab move with, no drawback. Coming up 125 base physical attack, which is kind of nutty. Obviously, as well, the Indeedee pairs incredibly well with Glade, obviously, because it just, stops fake outs. Which means you can go for something just Redirection plus Trick Room and then just start firing off some massive attacks. And yeah, I think Psy Spam right now in general is just pretty good. I do think Psy Spam Sunroom is probably the best way to play it. And we will touch on that shortly. But there are definitely other ways to play it as well. I've seen, paired up with things like regular Ursaluna, even Blood Moon Ursaluna. There are definitely a lot of ways to play it, but I do think if you're going to play it, you definitely want to go hard Trick Room. But obviously the biggest thing you need to kind of watch out for is how do you either 1, end the game in the first Trick Room, 2, potentially stop the Amoonguss from sporing your whole team, because that's the other big thing. This team really relies on Hat to deal with Amoonguss. And if you misplay the Hat, or they call the prediction and you swap out the wrong mon, and it can kind of get a little messy. But still, Psy Spam. If you put it in the right situation, it's still just going to rip holes in, through teams. Now, as much as this does pain me to say, I'm gonna have to say that Sand is probably the worst archetype on this list, simply because I haven't seen enough out of it. I'm personally a believer in Sand. I actually think Excadrill T-Tar's matchup into the current metagame is really good. The issue is the team you build around it. And because of that, I'm going to just put it in the B tier. I definitely would be okay with, putting it a little higher, but the teams we've seen that were successful with it with things like I actually think like one of the successful teams didn't even have Drill. It had Lycanroc, I think. But it had things like Corviknight on the team as well. So, it still is a very, very like solid core. It can definitely win a lot of matchups, especially when played well. But I do think it kind of struggles a lot compared to some of these other teams. But in saying that, again, it's very good into a lot of what's popular in the metagame right now. I also think it pairs really well with Ogre Fire and Rillaboom. The only issue I have with Rillaboom is it feels a little counterproductive because you're like dropping their HP just to recover it. But still, in saying that, I do think it is still a very strong core. I feel like I'm not giving it enough hype, but simply it's just because I think it is probably the worst core on this list. But still, I think in the right hands, and maybe as the metagame develops, someone will find the right way to play it. Because again, when you look at something like Excadrill, right, it's really, really good into Raging Bolt, right? It's really, really good into Fluttermane. The Protect plus Clear Amulet is very, very good into something like Incineroar, right? So a lot of these top mods, it's really good into. It does kind of struggle into Ogre Water just a bit. But again, you have like a Defensive Terror potentially, and then like a Clear Amulet Protect. You are really, really good into a lot of what's good. And not to mention, if you pair it up with something like Tornadus as well and have Tailwind plus Sand, you do outspeed a lot of the metagame. I do think one of my biggest pet peeves with this is I'm pretty sure Jolly in Sand is 1 point slower than Timid Max bundled with Booster, which definitely sucks. I think it hits 308 off memory, and obviously Bundle hits 309, which does suck a little bit. But regardless, I still think it's a pretty cool core, and definitely something I want to keep testing myself. I just need to find what's good around it. Now, this next core here, I'm personally a massive believer in, and that is the Setup Balance core. I actually think right now one of the best ways to play these Fire, Water, Grass balance teams is to pair it up with something like one of these three guys here, or really just in general any setup mon, right? I'm also a bit of a fan too as well of putting like a Rillaboom as well on this team, or like a Rillaboom in the Amoonguss slot, and running Swords Dance on Ogerpon as well. I did run that at Brisbane. I think Ogerpon Water with SD is very, very good. But again, in saying that, I think Sylveon right now is very, very good. If you pair up Sylveon with Incineroar and like Rillaboom, for example, double Fake Out plus Calm Mind and Intimidate is like very, very good. Same with Volcarona. I think we just saw, was it a Gabriel Agadi? I think it was. I probably should have fact checked that before I started this video. But I'm pretty sure he just like went undefeated the most recent regional championship before like losing his first game in top 4, I think, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, like Volk is like really, really good right now. It's a mon that like gets up a Quiver Dance and then it can like outspeed all of the common choice Scarfers outside of like what is it, Galarian Zapdos, which like I don't think Galarian Zapdos is that good. Actually that's a lie. I think Galarian Zapdos is actually pretty decent right now, but I don't think it's common enough to have to worry about. And then of course as well, something like Raging Bolt. Calm Mind Raging Bolt is like a massive threat, right? If they're like Calm Mind with Leftovers plus Rillaboom, the healing on this mon's insane. It has like so much HP that it's like recovery per turn is like stupidly high, especially for a mon that has really good defenses. And again, if you pair that up with something like the Incineroar or the Amoonguss, the Rillaboom, whatever it is, right? Like you have the Fake Out options, you have the redirection options, you can knock off certain items, you can just be annoying. It's like really, really good. And again, I think setup right now is like super, super slept on. I think the biggest issue setup has is like these hyper offensive teams. But again, like that's what you have these balance cores for, right? To try to slow them down, potentially go for Fake Out plus Spores and position these pieces that really want to set up and kind of sweep through games. So the Sun Room, I'm going to go ahead and put Sun Room in probably the A tier as well. As I said, I do think Sun Room is probably the best way to play Psy Spam right now. Essentially Sun Room, for anyone who doesn't know, is it's like, you obviously have the Psy Spam stuff, but then you have like Torkoal as well, which pairs really, really well with Psy Spam because it's like the slowest one of the format. It also pairs really, really well with Psy Spam because it can like help deal with things like Amoonguss and some of like the other types that like kind of mess with it, right? It's very, very good into a lot of these, like, the Urshifu Darks, for example. It can like definitely run through them. I think one of its biggest issues though is probably Raging Bolt because you buff it up a little bit, you give it the special attack boost. But regardless, it's very, very good. They tend to pair as well with Lilligant, Hisuian Lilligant in particular, because one, it's a fast chlorophyll mon. Two, it has like After You plus Eruption. It can also go for Sleep. And not to mention as well, I think you can run Torkoal on these teams with Helping Hand. And then you just go like Helping Hand Close Combat or Helping Hand Solar Blade, and it's very, very good. And not to mention, it also pairs incredibly well with like Last Mon Fluttermane, where you can actually use the Flutter Mane as like a Trick Room setter, but also a really strong special attacker, right? So you can have like a Choice Specs Flutter Mane on these teams with like double Fairy Stab plus Shadow Ball, and then you just go like Trick Room last option, and then like you can lead Torkoal Flutter Mane, and people are like, okay, like this is just like Helping Hand plus like Dazzling Gleam or Helping Hand Moonblast, and then you just go like Protect Trick Room, and then you can just switch out Flutter Mane the next turn. And Flutter Mane as well, I think with a special attack boost in particular, is definitely very good right now, right? Obviously, you can definitely run it with special attack booster as well. But I do think, sorry, with speed booster, I mean, but special attack on these slower teams is very good. I've seen people run as slow as like 169 just to outspeed the Landorus's, and then they just go like super bulky, like modest, and then basically like you can get it into a position in Trick Room where like you come in, maybe they have like this really fast offensive piece on the board, and you're also like super bulky, so you can like live a hit, and then you just fire off like these, you know, like Specs Dazzling Gleams in Trick Room and just like run through teams and deal a lot of damage. So Ting Dozo, now this is actually, in my opinion, probably one of the best cores to actually play Power Knight on. I'm going to spec this in the S tier. For anyone who hasn't seen these teams, they commonly pair up with things like Howl Hyper Offense or Power Knight. A lot of the time you see them paired up with things like Gouging Fire. I think Gouging Fire plus Ting Lu is like a really good combo. And then of course Chen Power +1, whether that be like Urshifu D-Knight, and then just some special attacker to offer, you know, a bit of special attack damage when you need it, whether that be Flutter Mane, Raging Bolt, or Landorus and Karn, which tend to be the main three everyone kind of goes for. But this combo is like super annoying, right? You have things like Stealth Rock potentially on the Ting Lu. They're also a lot of the time Rocky Helmet. The Dondozo also goes for things like Yawn. Actually, does the Dozo sometimes go for rocks? I feel like one of them sometimes goes for rocks. Dozo has Yawn like plus like Heavy Slam Wave Crash. I think actually I want to say it's like Yawn, Heavy Slam, Wave Crash, Protect, and then Ting Lu goes for like Protect, Stealth Rocks, like some dark move, normally like Ruination, I think, and Sand Tomb. Sometimes they'll like just like they'll skip Stealth Rock as well and just go like triple attack plus Protect. But it's like super annoying because you can just like Yawn and Sand Tomb a slot, and then like trap them in, double Protect, and now it's like stuck on the board asleep, and then you start doing it to the other side. It can be like super annoying. And again, it tends to pair up really well with things like Gouging Fire. Gouging Fire is a one that loves Ting Lu. Ting Lu is a one as well where if you run like Adamant like 76 with like 3 attack, really likes pairing up with the Gouging Fire because you just get like Ting Lu to +1 attack and people will be like, oh, it's just like a support. But then all of a sudden Ting Lu just starts dealing massive damage with its Stomping Tantrums, its Throat Chops. I do think it's like really good. I've seen it a lot on really high ladder, like people at like 1800 plus were like absolutely cooking me with it. And yeah, I do think it's one of the best teams in the metagame right now. I do think it was actually originally invented by the Japanese players. And yeah, you know, Japanese offense, I guess, is yeah, very good. So next up here is the Venusaur Walking Wake Sun. I'm going to slap this here in the B+ tier, simply because while I think this is very good, it definitely requires a specific skill set and a lot of practice, right? Obviously there was a player, I wish I remembered his name, I followed him on Twitter. But I think he won like 2 events with it, and then he gave the team to someone else, and they went and won the event. Like we're talking like pretty big online tours. Like I think he won like a 200+ player tournament with it. And I think when you have like his level of like expertise on the team, where I believe he's practiced at like the entire format, it's very good. I think Venusaur does have a very nice matchup into a lot of what's good right now. Walking Wake is definitely a slept-on mon. I think he was running Covered Cloak, and the idea behind that was like you can't get faked out, and you just one-shot Incineroars, which is like pretty cool. Not to mention, like, things like Ogerpon Water, like, do 0 damage to you, and they also don't want to eat Draco Meteors in the sun. And yeah, I think, like, it is a really cool team, but I do think it is very player dependent. This is not a team where, like, anyone could pick it up and just do really good. I think you have to understand Hyper Offense really well. But regardless, I do think it is a very cool take on Sun, right? You've got the Torkoal, which, in my opinion, like, Torkoal's biggest issue with these teams in particular is it's not a good Sun setter in the sense that it's like, Torkoal wants to play in Trick Room, these two don't want to play in Trick Room. So all of a sudden, like, maybe you've got to play, like, Eject Pack Torkoal with, like, Overheat plus Helping Hand to, like, help these guys out. But then again, it still gets kind of weird where it's like, you know, you don't have any mons that are offering spread damage, so, like, obviously you pair this up with something like Flutter Mane, right? Like, Terra Fairy Choice Specs Flutter Mane, get a speed boost, and then you have it next to Torkoal, who can obviously Helping Hand it, right? And it is cool. But again, I do think some of these better teams can kind of just deal with it. And again, Torkoal is a mon where, as good as it is, I think if it's not on Trick Room, it can feel very underwhelming at times. And not to mention, I do think teams like this definitely struggle into the new Snow stuff. Obviously, I think, you know, Hisuian Arcanine with Terra is very good into it. And not to mention as well, I do think you can just, you know, I think Ninetales is just a better Pokemon than Torkoal if Trick Room isn't up. Tornadus Rain, the king of Regulation E. This has definitely fallen off a lot in usage. But I actually think this is probably the most slept on archetype in the game right now. I'm going to say it's S tier. I definitely think it's potentially an S plus tier. Like, obviously there is a lot that is good into this right now. Obviously these teams here can kind of like pivot around. It can be annoying. You've got like Amoonguss and Ogerpon, which are both very, very good into the Urshifu. But I do think Focus Sash, Max Tornadus on these teams is very, very good. I think one of the biggest issues people have with teams like this, though, is you kind of like, it feels like you're kind of forced a lot of the time to run your Urshifu with something like Choice Scarf, which can be kind of awkward because sometimes you just want to be able to double protect with these teams on turn 1. But in saying that, I do think it's very, very good, right? I think having Tornadus just be like super offensive when paired with these two is very, very good. But I also think Tornadus and Urshifu both benefit a lot from like slower, bulkier stuff. And of course, I do think it pairs incredibly well with things like Bridge Rain. I just think in general, this is a more flexible core because again, you can pair this with things like this core right here, like just put these two on the same team. And then all of a sudden, you know, you've got these very good defensive pieces paired up with these very good offensive pieces. You probably wouldn't run Ogerpon Wellspring on it, but again, like Ogerpon Wellspring plus Urshifu is probably fine anyway. But I think it's a very, very good offensive core that is very, very good into a lot of, you know, what is good right now. It can outpace a lot of teams. Honestly, you just need to make sure you understand your Trick Room matchups with this and also how to like kind of beat these balanced teams, right? That's why we see things like Landorus going for the substitute over double ground stab on these teams, right? Because you want to be able to substitute in front of the Amoonguss, while also having things like potentially like your own Rillaboom, which I do think is also really, really good on these teams. Because you can have like your own Rillaboom plus like Incineroar, for example, to make sure you get up the sub. And then all of a sudden, if you get up the sub against things like Amoonguss, the game can feel really, really over for your opponent because all of a sudden, like they've got these defensive pieces on the board. They can't really deal with the Landorus before the Landorus gets a KO. And it can just get really, really messy. But yeah, definitely one of the best cores in the game, at least in my opinion, right? I'm a hyper offensive player. I love having like Torn Rain. I think it's very, very strong still. And the final team we're going to look at here is the Tailwind Psyspam. This is a core that is pretty close to my heart, as I did play a lot of this at the start of the regulation, as I did think I was probably going to take it into Melbourne Regional. But if I'm being honest, I don't think Iron Crown is that guy. I think it is still a very good combo, a very good core in general, right? Because this core tends to pair up with things like Flutterfish plus like Urshidark, or like potentially drop one of them for something like Lamora or Raging Bolt. It is still very, very good. Obviously, having, you know, your own Trick Room Indeedee is very good into opposing Trick Room matchups. Obviously, you know, having like Indeedee plus Iron Crown is just very good. Just a fast Psyspam mode. Again, very, very powerful still. I just don't think it is as good as this version here. I think the Trick Room Psyspam, and honestly, maybe that's what I should have put is like Trick Room Psyspam here. But I think when people think of Psyspam, they think of the Trick Room variant anyway. But I'd still think the Tailwind variant is still pretty good. Maybe, I don't want to say underexplored, because again, I think Iron Crown is really good. But Iron Crown is this really weird mon where like you kind of want the speed booster so you outspeed things like Chen Pao, but you also want the special attack booster so you actually kill the Chen Pao. Because I'm pretty sure like Terra Ghost doesn't die to a timid Iron Crown, whereas like you have to be modest to like kill it if it goes Terra Ghost. But then like if you go modest, it just gets an attack off and it's just like, you know, feels kind of awkward. But yeah, still a pretty good core in general. I guess, what is there anything here I want to change? Right? I definitely think Sand is the worst, and I think this here is the best. Is this core? I don't know. Maybe this core should be like down here in the A+ tier. Oh, is that? Maybe Howl should even go up a bit. I don't know. I feel like that's probably like the best team here, with like this one probably being like the worst. Hold on. Let me. Yeah, I think this team probably deserves to be in this tier. Yeah, that seems. Actually, you know what? This is going up to A+. I don't think I can put Bridge Rain in A+ and not have Kumowo here. That feels kind of like that feels kind of bad. Yeah, I'm gonna say this is like probably like here somewhere. I don't know. Maybe even like Moon Balance is a little too low. Like simply because it's like this here with like Roaring Moon. But again, like it's still an A+ core. I still think it's really, really good. I think that's one of the cool things about this metagame is like even these guys I've got here in the B+ tier, like yeah, sure they're at the bottom of the tier list, but I still think they are really, really good. The only one I'm not 100% sold on is Sand, but again, I see the potential in Sand. I think it could be really, really good. Is that how I'm going to leave it? Like 222 Dozos, like you could like honestly put it here and people probably wouldn't complain. I'm personally just not a fan of Dondozo and the way it works. But again, I think in the right hands, I'm sure like Chopper Cross could like take this to an event and just like win it still. Like he's that good, and I think in the right hands, it's good. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for the tier list, guys. As I said at the start of the video, obviously, let me know what you think, you know, down below. Maybe there's a core you think I missed. And of course, let me know what you think, right? Am I underrating some of these cores? Is there maybe some of these cores that I'm overrating, right? Do you maybe think that like the Snow team isn't that good? It was just like the right meta call? I don't know. Let me know down below. Yeah. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for this one. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.